Welcome back to the episode of Caribidreams TV. I'm your host, Maurice, Mr. Property John. And what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about a very important topic when it comes to the real estate market. And that topic is property valuation. Very critical. So we're going to get hype, and we're going to get into this video. All right, so why is property valuation so very important? We're going to be breaking down why it's important and what to look for when you do get a valuation document presented in front of you. All right, so let's present the scenarios. You're buying a piece of land, you're buying a house, even if you're buying the property cash. And let me say that again, especially for those folks overseas. If you're buying a property cash, it is very important that you still do a property valuation. Now, when you go into the bank, that is an absolute necessity. The bank is going to get you to do a valuation. Now, every bank has a list of valuators that they approve of. So when you go and you apply for your loan, you're going to have to choose one of those valuators to get your valuation done. And of course, you could examine the valuation to make sure that you're getting the best quality valuation. Now, that is you buying a property. When you're selling a property, it's also important to get your property valued. Why is that important? Now, there are a lot of people who, for example, they're living overseas, they've been overseas for 10, 15 years, and they have a property that they want to get rid of, or they come into some inheritance and they want to sell the properties that they have gotten through the inheritance because they don't plan to come back. It is very important to get your properties valued. And understanding the valuation is very important too. For example, and we're going to pick them out one by one. You have a property that you just inherited. You're going to get a lawyer to administrate that property. Now, if you take a very hands-off approach, it is very easy for you to get robbed in that process. Why is it very easy to get robbed? Now, I have a client who has a property that doesn't have a road, doesn't have light and water, but when they did the administration, they valued that property at $10 a square foot. Now, for somebody who living overseas for a number of years, they're not going to question that valuation. You know, it's good for them. Oh, they think their property is very valuable. But then when it comes to the agent, and the agent is realizing this property does not value that $10 a square foot. Lands that don't have road, lands that don't have light and water are classified as agricultural, which you cannot value those at $10 a square foot. Now, why is it advantageous for your lawyer to get a big valuation? Because the lawyer's fee is tied to the administration's total value. So if you allow the lawyer to choose a valuator, that valuator might be inclined, if they choose the one that might be not the most reputable one, that valuator might try to skew the value in their favor so that when the fees to be paid out for the administration, you have this huge figure for your assets that in fact is not the case. That is why it's very important to be hands-on in all of your processes. So you inherit a property, you're taking it to a lawyer to get it administrated. Be involved in the valuation step of that property, because you might end up in a case where you pay the lawyer this big amount of money to do the administration, and then when you come to my door to get it sold, I have to tell you, I am very sorry, but that property is actually not valued that much. And I have a client right now who is going through that process. I had to cut down the land for them to and they visited St. Vincent. They went and walked it and realized this is not valued as much as what was told to me. So that is one cautionary tale there. Be involved. Not because you're only living overseas and you've not been here for a long time, ask relevant questions. Who's doing evaluation? How much years of experience? And also, when you get that document, ask to get a copy of that valuation so you can look it through yourself. And I'm going to be telling you in this video what are the things that you need to look for when you're doing a valuation. What are the things that you need to look for in a document? All right, so let's say you're doing a valuation for a piece of land. The things that you have to look out for. One, does that piece of land have an access road? And every land is supposed to have access road, but does it have a paved access road? Is it actually there? It might be there on the survey plan, but it's not actually there in reality. Does this piece of land have light, electricity, and utility and water at that property? That will alter the classification of that property from residential to agricultural. How big is this piece of land? Now, you have a lot of valuators who get 4 acres of land and they want to value 4 acres of land at a per square foot value. Incorrect. If you are selling 4 acres of land and it's not developed, which means there is not any subdivision, there is no roads in between, light and water is just at the start of the land, you cannot value that at a cost per square foot. That has to be valued as development property. A lot of people, they want to sell a large amount of land and they want to sell it as residential property. You could be right in a residential area, but if that land is undeveloped, it cannot be classified as developed land. It must be valued very differently. All right, so getting back to the start, making sure that the utilities are present, making sure the road access is present and accounted for. And then in that valuation, you need to make sure that your valuator looks and does research for comparables. What is a comparable? A comparable is past evidence of sales within the same area. So your valuator will go and, for example, most valuators try to get a copy of the database from the valuation department, which has all of the sales records dating back years. So you pick out in the last 3 years what has lands being sold at in this particular area. So you are gonna see the trends. So for example, the valuation department sets a value of $12 a square foot, but the market is saying we can't get $12 a square foot. So I had to sell the property at $10 a square foot. And if several persons have lands that are valued at $12 a square foot, but they could only get $10 on the market, very important. So you have the market value, which is very important when you look at the comparable data, and then you have the actual value. And then you have to use those two figures to calculate your valuation, because you could have a property that could be valued at $12, but nobody is willing to pay the $12 for it. That must be taken into consideration, and that will be easy to recognize when you look at the sales trend over the past 2 or 3 years. So market value. So you have the cost approach, you have the market value approach. So you're making sure that you don't just do the cost approach, but you must take into consideration the market. What is the market telling me this property is valued? All right, so the same can be said when it comes to a valuation of a house. Now, if you're valuing a house, how do you arrive at the value? The valuator goes out, measures the property, gets the size of the building, then it gets the size of the land, it looks at the comparable database and finds what is lands going for in that area, and then you do a cost approach. What is the cost approach? What would it cost to build this property? So a few years ago, it was about $185 a square foot. Now, because of the pandemic, because of the war, that is trending more up to $220 a square foot. So you multiply that one. Let's say the property is 2,000 square foot. You multiply the 2,000 square feet by 220, and then you have to take into consideration other factors. Depreciation. So if this property is not a brand new property, let's say that 10-year-old property, obviously there's going to be depreciation. Whether it be a 5% depreciation, whether it be a 10% depreciation, the evaluator has to go and make an assessment based on the condition of the roof, the tiles, the paint. Make an assessment and say, how much am I going to depreciate this property? Also, you might have an upstairs and downstairs property. The upstairs has a better finish than the downstairs. The evaluator is not supposed to measure the entire building and multiply it by the same $220 a square foot. If the finishing of the property is different, if the downstairs have a lower quality finish, that figure has to be separated. So for example, if you have 2,000 square foot on the top floor, 1,000 square foot on the ground floor, you have to multiply the top floor by 220, and then the ground floor might come in at maybe 165 because the finishing is different. These are things that you have to pay attention to when you examine your valuation document. So you're depreciating the property based on the condition. So you must look, if I know my property is 25 years and the evaluator doesn't have depreciation accounted for, something is wrong. Ask a question. Also, you have additional improvement. So if your property is gated, if you have solar panels, if you have AC units, those things are the additional values that you have to put a figure to. So you have to look for that in the breakdown. There's always a breakdown in every valuation. So you have the valuation of the house itself, you have the additional improvements, and then you have the land. And then the evaluator has to then do a market assessment. Goes back into that database of sales and see, okay, there's a property that was valued $1 million, but because of the market conditions, that property was sold for $750,000. How does that affect the present sale? It has to affect the present sale because the market determines the value of a property. If you have a load of property on the market, they're not selling because the price is not meeting the market value. You have to then do an analysis and merge the cost approach, which is how much is going to cost me to build this property versus what is the market willing to pay for this property. All right. So these are things that you have to look at. These will be inside of the valuation document for you to read. All right. So let's say you're doing a valuation for insurance purposes. That is very different. You do the cost approach. So insurance doesn't take into consideration the land. You do a simple cost approach. You don't have to take into consideration the market when it comes to that. So that's a more simple valuation. So good. So we already break down how to value a piece of land. Remember, the comparables are important. When you're doing a house, you're looking at if you have multiple floors, is the finishing the same? And you then have to look at the valuation. Is my valuator doing floor by floor because my finishing is different? Did my valuator do a market assessment? Did my valuator take into account the comparables? Did my valuator depreciate my property based on how much years and wear and tear on the building? Did my valuator include my other improvements? Fencing, back wall, solar, AC, all of those need to be aligned within the valuation. All right. So, and also when you are doing valuations for administration, be involved in the process. Make sure that you read your valuation carefully. All right. Now, let's talk to people who are overseas. They just retire. They have a bunch of money. They want to buy a property in St. Vincent. When you come to me or any other agent, you have cash and you think that, okay, I have cash, I could just go and buy. Do not do that. Get a proper valuation and make sure that you know what this property is actually valued. You could get help from your realtor to get a list of valuators, but try to make the calls yourself. Look at their qualifications, see the years that they've been doing this, and choose a valuator with the guidance of your realtor to make sure that your interest is represented. There are many people who are cash buyers who buy a property without doing the valuation, and then when they secure that property and they come to St. Vincent, they realize this property is not valued what I paid for it. And that puts you at a very bad disadvantage. So, guys, valuation is important. If you need any help when it comes to reading a valuation document, unfortunately, my dad passed away. He did valuation for years. From a very young child, as soon as I could pull a tape, and I was all around St. Vincent doing valuations for him. And he worked for almost all of the major banks. So, if you have any questions, you got a valuation, you have any questions and you want to come to me and ask me, hey, what do I need to look for? My number is 492-6128. Don't forget the 784. You will get help from me to properly read the valuation and see if it is a valuation that is of quality standard. All right? So, that has been another episode of Caribidreams TV. This is Maurice John, your humble servant real estate agent.